Hey guys, welcome to a new video that I'm going to be featuring on the channel. Um, I'm not sure what I'm going to call these videos yet, but it's primarily going to be story times and just other topics that I want to talk about specifically from the perspective of a taken in hand in a domestic discipline marriage or relationship. And so I want to just say welcome. I'm glad that I have a space now to share more of these story times, to share more of like my personal perspectives on some topics that don't necessarily lend themselves well to being topics for the main podcast or the question videos. So I'm happy we're doing this. I'm happy to be offering another video on YouTube, and so I hope that you guys enjoy it too. Let me know if you do. Also, if you want more content like this, join our Patreon because I have so much more content over there that kind of delves deeper into these topics. So if you like this, you'll like it over there too. So I wanted to start this like story time series with the story of my first spanking. So I get asked all the time, like, what was that first spanking like? You started to do domestic discipline, you earned your first punishment, you kind of had to face that situation for the very first time. What was that like? And looking back on it, I think that once I tell this story, it'll just like it's a shock that we ended up where we are now with where we started. I'll just put it that way. So, my first punishment spanking was given to me for the same reason as my most recent punishment spanking, but that's a totally different story. In the next one of these videos, we'll go over that story. Um but our that first punishment spanking was given to me for not coming to bed on time. That was our first rule. Coda really has been focused on helping me fix my sleep schedule and um, helping motivate me towards a better bedtime our entire domestic discipline relationship. And so that very first uh, discipline spanking was for missing my bedtime. And we neither one of us knew what to expect. Neither one of us really knew what it was going to be like. And so it was interesting to say the least. So when we negotiated our rules, we were negotiating consequences. And I think we've mentioned on the podcast before that back then we had a very structured, very, very structured um, way that we were approaching punishment that we do not suggest because it failed big time. And that is that back then it was one SWAT per minute that I stayed up late. And so I think I had stayed up like 20 minutes late, which now the idea of an entire punishment being only like 20 swats with a paddle is very, very laughable to me because that is not even touching the surface of what my punishments are like now. Um, and so, but back then, having never experienced any type of like disciplinary spanking in my marriage before, I was I was nervous because I didn't know like what is this going to feel like? What is this going to be like? Um is it going to just be excruciating? Like what am I really signing up for here? Like we were still in the period where we weren't sure if domestic discipline was going to be a long-term fit for our relationship or not. So I was like, is how is he feeling about the prospect of giving me a spanking? Like, what is the mental process he's going through? How do I feel about this? Does this make me feel inferior? Does it make me feel like he's treating me like a child? All the things that people often use as judgments, and people often fear um, is what's going on, or when they think about domestic discipline, they think that that's how they would feel. And so all of those things were kind of running through my head, um, because I didn't, reading about domestic discipline, thinking about it, thinking about what it would be like, I didn't have any of those feelings. Like, I never felt like it was something that was going to make me feel childish or inferior or less than or any of those things. But I was like, am I still going to feel that way after? Like, after I've actually been spanked, am I still going to feel um, like myself, or like I have the same standing in my relationship that I had previously? How is this spanking going to change the dynamic of our relationship? And I was really afraid um, that domestic discipline was going to change our relationship in a negative way. And I was like, once we do this, we can't undo it, and we have to kind of like deal with the fallout. And so it felt like a really big risk. And so it wasn't necessarily like I was nervous about the spanking. I was kind of like, I don't even remember having remorse over my behavior. That's how terrible this is. Is I just remember kind of going through this thought process of like, what's going to happen? But I don't remember actually being sorry for what I did. And that's terrible. Like, that's a huge part of the discipline process, is feeling that remorse and that regret, but I don't remember feeling that. And maybe you can't that first spanking because you don't know what it's going to be like. Like, you don't have a uh measure to, like, you don't have a metric to measure by what what that experience actually entails, so it's harder to kind of have that initial regret. Maybe. Maybe I'm just unique. Maybe it's because I knew that the spanking wasn't going to really be that long. Maybe that's why I wasn't feeling that way. But I was like, okay, we're going to do this thing. So it came time to have the spanking because we already had a child by that point. So we have always been in a position where we have to wait until later in the evening. At that point, we did not have the house we have now with the studio space. So we were in our bedroom. Our child's bedroom was right next door. So we really had to kind of wait until they were asleep, put on sound machines, do all the tips and tricks that we have talked about to kind of create some sound barriers so that we didn't risk waking them up. And so the time came, and I was like, again, I didn't know what to expect. And so Coda had me just bend over the edge of our bed. We were using a wooden paddle at that point, so um, I can't even remember if he did any type of lecture. I think that perhaps he did just a very quick, like, um, you know why we're here. You need to come to bed on time. Just a very quick, it was not a very impactful lecture. And I'll talk about that in a later video somewhere. Somewhere I will talk about, probably here, um, about why the lecture process is so important to me personally. But he didn't really give a lecture, not an extensive one if he did one at all. And so he delivered the first SWAT. And I remember being surprised by the sensation because I had never felt that before. I remember kind of like being a little like taken back, I guess you would say. And but then I remember thinking like that didn't really hurt, because it didn't. It stung a little. It didn't hurt. And I was like, okay, I'm just gonna, I'm not gonna say anything. Like, especially that first spanking when you have no idea what it's supposed to feel like. Of course, you're not gonna pipe up and be like, that didn't hurt. And that sounds really, really disrespectful mid spanking. So I wouldn't even suggest that now. Um, Talk about it afterwards, but don't like say mid spanking, like, that doesn't hurt. And so that was my initial thought process. And then he delivered the next SWAT. And again, it stung a little, but that sting quickly faded away. And this continued through the spanking. I think that his own inexperience of what was required from the amount of force that he was delivering, I don't think he was spanking me that hard, is what I'm saying. And he obviously wasn't. I think that the paddle we were using was just not a good paddle for us either. We have since rehomed that paddle because it was a very wide paddle. I mean, it looked, to give like some concept, think of like the classic fraternity paddle look, but it was lightweight. And so it just, the sensation was spread over a large enough surface area that it just wasn't impactful and not in the way that it needed to be. And so I think he might have actually been trying to give harder swats, and he was putting more like power behind the swats he was delivering, but the paddle itself was just spreading that sensation out to where it didn't feel that bad. And so we got through the 20, and I was keeping count in my head too, um, which is another reason we don't suggest having, at least having the taken in hand know how many swats that they're going to receive, because I was keeping track. So I think around 15, I was like, okay, this is getting a little harder to bear, but I knew I only had 5 left, and so I was like, I can tough it out. It's okay. Where if I didn't know how long that spanking was going to go, I would have been at least in a better headspace to surrender myself to the process rather than just tough it out. And that's what I did. I just kind of toughed it out, and I was like, okay, this really isn't that bad. Um, I remember like after the spanking was over, I don't know, I can't remember if Coda really did any type of like follow up, like, okay, now I expect you to blah blah blah. Um, like, now I expect you to follow the rules, come to bed on time. I don't remember if he said anything like that or if it was just like, okay, it's over. Um, Obviously we kind of went in with a concept of like aftercare and um reconnecting afterwards. So I think we did hug, and he told me that I was forgiven and all of the good things that he still does. But yeah, it just was very lackluster. It was something that really did not deter my behavior, and I continued to break that rule. Um, Obviously, because next video you're going to hear about my most recent spanking, and it was given for the same reason. So obviously it's still a struggle, but in those early days, I definitely was weighing the pros and cons, because after that experience, I was like, okay, if that's what 20 felt like, I think I could take 30. I think I could take 40. And so it really, like, our system, again, this is why we don't suggest this system, is our system completely backfired on Coda, because then I was like, I can take I can take that. Now that I have the experience and know what I'm in for, now I know how far I can push the boundary before it starts to maybe be too much. Um, and obviously we've shifted our system since then, because yeah, that's not going to work. That is setting yourself up for failure. That's setting yourself up for frustration. And we definitely went through our fair share of failure and frustration, but I think we're in a better place now. But for anyone who was curious what our very first spanking was like, it was, I wish, I just wish it was a better story. I wish it was like this like turning point of like he asserted his authority and I understood my place and that we really got our relationship started on, you know, a rock solid foundation from day one, and that's just not our story. And those stories exist, don't get me wrong, like those people do exist, that is their story and that's legitimate, but that wasn't our story. And I just want you to know, like, if it's a rocky start for you, if it is something that um, doesn't feel natural, or it feels like you're kind of like wading through the waters trying to get there, that's okay too. um, because that was our story. We had to kind of make a lot of failure in order to eventually get to the success. So I just want to encourage you, if you are finding that it's hard or that it feels rocky, or that maybe your first spanking just wasn't what you expected and it led to more frustration, it led to maybe even more arguments or more intentionally breaking rules, it's not that you did it wrong. It's that you just didn't have the experience to do it in a way that was the most productive. And so, and that doesn't mean that domestic discipline's not for you. It just means that you have to figure out a system that works for you. Anyway, I want to end the video there. I want to thank you for joining me. I hope you enjoyed this story. Please, please, please let me know what you thought about this, if you want me to continue making these videos, and if you have any thoughts or opinions that you want to share, I would love to hear them, and I will talk to you guys next time.